on the West Her hotline. Hi, Chris.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
All right. So this is what I would do if I ran every team.
Yes.
And that's a really fun idea. A lot of these picks, like where the Bills go and sort of along the way, do come out pretty close to or exactly the same sometimes to like what another mock draft attempting to predict the draft would look like. But, Jack Besh at 10. This is exciting. Maybe, would you say this? Maybe wide receiver is the position where you might have the most different opinions than you think the consensus.
Yeah, that's a good call, and I would agree with that. I think I'm not quite as high on Matthew Golden. I like Luther Burden ahead of Ted McMillan. I like Jack Besh. I love Elijah Badger. That's film-based. That's analytics-based. And, yeah, I think Jack Besh is someone that should be considered a first-round caliber prospect in this class. I think the only concern that most people have with him is, he's not crazy fast. But it's really been long time now that we understand that running 4.2 or 4.3 is not like at the top of the priority list when it comes to being a quality wide receiver in the NFL. And that Jack Besh has everything else that teams want at that outside and then can play inside wide receiver spot in today's NFL.
How realistic is it that he becomes a first-round pick at all, in your objective opinion, recognizing that you did this today and like this player enough to have him go as high as Mike indicated?
Pretty unlikely. I think early second wouldn't shock me because it feels like as the pre-draft process has rolled along that there are more people that understand that he is a pretty rock-solid prospect. And for a lot of the teams picking in the early portions of the second round, they could certainly use a wide receiver. I mean, with the Browns, Giants, Titans all right there, they could use it. The Jaguars, obviously, at 37, the Raiders, the Patriots. So, the first, 7 or 8 picks, they could all – I'm not saying that 7 receivers are going to go off the board, but all of those 7 teams could use wide receiver. So even the Saints at 40, the Bears at 39. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's picked there. But for whatever reason, it doesn't feel like Jack Besh will be a first-round pick. And not that we're going to go into the weeds as deep as Bulldog and I did last week on, the mechanics – of the pre-draft process and the evaluation process, but we should all realize that probably half of the first-round picks are not going to be very good, half will be solid players, and that a lot of quality future Pro Bowlers, All-Pros, will be picked on day 2 and day 3 in this draft.
How similar is this year then to last year for receiver? Because last year, Keon Coleman was the first receiver picked in round 2. There were 7 picked in round 1. We won't have that. But we did have last year what you kind of just described. If it happens that those teams that you could say need one, pick one. But could you see, again, 6 to 8 receivers going in round 2?
Yeah, I think it would almost be, if we're going to compare to last year, we had wide receivers picked at 23, 28, 31, 32, 33, 34. So 4 picks in a row were wide receivers, and 6 out of 8 picks were wide receiver. Just push that back 5 to 10 picks. So I think we're going to get the 3 to maybe 4 in the first round that we've talked a lot about, and then from potentially picks 33 to 40, we could see 4 or 5 go off the board, and then a few more later in round 2. So they ultimately got the 7 in round 1. We're not going to get that, and that was pretty rare. But, yeah, I think not even just on day 2, but round 2 really has felt like the sweet spot, and we've talked about that for the last couple months.
How you're feeling about Burden? He's come up a lot. That's like Mike's draft crush.
Finally,
so I don't mean to he's probably waiting to ask you a Burden question, but I want to make sure we don't move on from receiver before it comes up. So I'm going to do it here. What is it about him that you like so much that maybe other people are missing, or what are the dings on Luther Burden?
So the ding would probably start with that he had 60 catches for under 700 yards in his final season. But I go back to 2023 when he was 20 years old and had 82 catches for over 1,200 yards in the SEC. And at the end of the Missouri season in 2023, it was this is going to be the first wide receiver off the board. And so the production, the usage was a little weird in 24, that it was just screen-based, and they didn't let him really get down the football field very often. I thought when they did, he adjusted to it and made some difficult grabs very well. Beyond that, I like that he's young, that I just mentioned. He's only 21 years old. The production early in his career that I just mentioned, and after the catch, he is a big-time athlete. I think he's very similar in terms of size and in terms of what he can do with the football in his hands, contact, balance, and cutting, to that of DJ Moore, who was a first-round pick in 2018. So I think Luther Burden, I'm right there with Mike, that I think we're going to look back and say, oh, we probably collectively just kind of looked too much into that final year production, when in reality, in the right usage role, he would have been more productive and widely considered a first-round pick, and will probably get picked in the second round.
That usage and role in the NFL, I sort of moved off of him as an idea weeks ago when it came up that he looked like a slot. He was being stereotyped or sort of like put in that box. He's a slot receiver in the NFL. I heard Greg Cosell a couple of Fridays ago with Brownie and Tasker on One Bills Live talking about that. And yes, he did operate a lot out of the slot, especially last year, but according to Cosell, and this just got my attention, this guy, maybe he reads like Shakir is settled in as the Bills slot. But when the Bills picked Shakir, I think I remember you and a lot of other people saying he can play anywhere you want. And Cosell sort of described Burden that way as well, which allowed him to sort of re-enter my thought process for the Bills, because I don't have any need for a guy who's going to be exclusively slot. But if he's versatile enough to play Z or even X, then I think I'm back. My interest is there again.
Yeah, I mean, around 80% of the time he was in the slot in college, but I don't think at a little over 6 foot and over 200 pounds, that's not like your classic slot receiver build. I mean, he's a little bit bigger than Khalil Shakir. And at Boise State, Khalil Shakir was mostly in the slot, but also made plays on the perimeter. I think if you put him there on the perimeter, so to speak, which I think we have to kind of blur the lines with that distinction, because we know, especially even in Buffalo, just watching, if you only watch Bills games, how many stacked formations and times where the wide receivers are close to the line of scrimmage, right, where technically the furthest receiver on the outside is like in the slot. He's very close to the hash marks, that Joe Brady moves those players around. This is not Andre Reed and Michael Irvin, where the guys are just playing on the outside right next to the sideline. So I think Luther Burden in today's NFL, and maybe I even get a little bit too caught up in slot or outside, I think he could be useful in this offense, and there's a thought that he could be available well into the second round.
Chris, we're like-minded on a few things, running back value and this particular player. Also this, and I didn't quite realize it until today when I saw this work that you did where you used your own opinion to put a mock draft together. There are two, and this is also informed by my work on ADP chasing, where I'm learning a ton about some of these prospects, more than ever, and from our conversations with you. There are two pass catchers that don't add up for me in terms of what I hear people say about them as players and where they're projected to go. They're both projected to go earlier than it sounds like they should. And I think you would agree. One is Golden, who doesn't really have like the exact right profile for a guy that you'd necessarily project to NFL success. And the other is Tyler Warren. And I continue to see Tyler Warren as everybody's first tight end off the board. But anytime I turn anybody on, like, well, it really should be Loveland instead. But Warren is going to be, like, he's plus 500 Loveland to be the first tight end pick. That's a pretty good price. So in your mock draft today, you judged accordingly. Like, I'm not sure Golden even shows up, and Warren goes 29th. So do I have it right?
No, I think you do. I think, and it's a perfect segue from the last the last topic with Luther Burden, because talk about usage. I mean, at Penn State last season, Ty Warren, you see, and I think it's easy, and I've talked about this with the impact that Anthony Richardson has had on Jalen Milroe. I think the impact that Brock Bowers had in breaking the rookie reception record and just looking like a future All-Pro at tight end. And then people see, wow, 101 catches for Ty Warren. Like, he must just be Brock Bowers 2.0. He's not. He's someone that was utilized in a way where they're like, we don't care how we're going to do it, but we're going to get him the ball 8 to maybe even 15 times a game. We're going to line him up as the Wildcat running back in the shotgun. We're going to throw him tunnel screens, bubble screens. We're going to utilize him in a variety of ways where when you get the All-22 film and you watch, and you could even see this on the broadcast angle too, the separation ability, the explosiveness, the smoothness that it takes to run away from a linebacker when you're making a cut, not anywhere close to what we saw with Brock Bowers last year, or even Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid the year before that. He came into the combine with shorter arms than expected, not quite this, Rob Gronkowski type wingspan and big hands. I think he does have kind of just that natural athlete ability to him where he's going to hurdle guys, he can run over people if he needs to. But if you really look at his numbers and Matthew Golden's numbers, they're not really measuring up to classic first-round players at those positions. Like Ty Warren's missed tackle force rate, so just how many times or how frequently he was missing or forcing a missed tackle. 17% of the time. That's pretty good, especially at a high volume of catches. Brock Bowers last year was at 25%. So 17 against 25, completely different. And I know that you're a big yards per route run guy, Mike, that Matthew Golden, until really the college football playoff, his yards per route run over his entire Texas career, the last 2 seasons there when he transferred in, were not great. I think it's like almost a extended bowl game bias that we used to see in like the Brady Quinn and the Jamarcus Russell era, but we just saw it for 2 or 3 games because Texas got far into the college football playoff.
And then he ran a 4.29 on top of everything else.
Yes, absolutely. Right? Which I don't think he's that fast, but I mean, the numbers are the numbers, and that actually boosted him a little bit for me because I'm going to always rely on those numbers more than my own observations on film, but it's kind of felt like the consensus with just other draft analysts who I've talked to. He doesn't look like 4.29. Like Henry Ruggs ran 4.27, I believe, coming out of Alabama. No one ever caught him in the SEC, and that happened way too many times for Matthew Golden to actually be a 4.29 guy on the field.
So you do this project today. This is what I would do for each team. And it makes you think about, or you'll tell us, it might make you think about teams and their propensity to draft for need, so to speak. Yeah. Like, all right, well, this team it's not the best player on the board, but they really need an offensive guard or whatever it might be. How many teams do that, like maybe problematically? Do you think it's like, what do you think of that as a sort of a statement about how teams draft?
I think a lot more teams do this than they will say. I think every GM just about after the draft, number one, they'll all say, oh, this player that we got in the first round, he's the one we really wanted. When it's like, how did you know he was going to be there? Unless you had the first or second or third pick, there was probably 5 to 7 players or more that you were considering. And they'll always say, oh, he was just the highest player on our board. And that's not anything toward Brandon Beane. I really think that's every GM, when in reality, I think they are saying, all right, we're just going to evaluate this entire draft like a draft analyst would, and then just whoever's the highest ranked player, that's what we're going to ultimately do. When I think need, and I'm not totally saying that it's stupid for them to do this, but I think almost every team bakes in like, oh, we kind of need a deep tackle, we kind of need a corner, so maybe we're going to have corners a little bit higher on our board, or like what you're saying, they have a Jack Bash relatively high, and he's the highest player left, but they're like, oh, we're actually pretty loaded at receiver. Let's go and pick the highest corner because we need corners. I think as the draft progresses, teams tend to just pick athletic flyers on day 3, and maybe that is more of where we see those best player available selections, and I think that's no surprise then that you get the Khalil Shakirs and the Christian Benfords and the L'Jarius Sneeds. I could go through a million names of guys that were picked later in the draft that maybe at the time it was like, okay, they didn't really need a corner, but they drafted this safety corner from Louisiana Tech, and then L'Jarius Sneed becomes an all-pro. So I think far too often we, and this is including myself, can get so enthralled with round 1 and what do teams need to do, and they need a defensive tackle or they need a corner, when I do think in a vacuum or in a perfect world, literally just picking the best available player is actually the best way to go about it, because as we know, rosters change so quickly in today's NFL.
How much of a case can you make for the Bills using any of those top 3 picks they have, the first and the 2 seconds, on a receiver? Because a lot of even, mocks that go further than just round 1, into round 2, they've got all 3. It's a corner, a tackle, and an edge player. I don't want to say 90% of the time, but it's a lot. It seems to me.
It's high.
Yeah, right. How much of a case? Because Sal went away for a week or so. When he was last on with me last week, he left me with he thinks the Bills will use those top 3 picks all on defense. I don't know if he said he'd be stunned if it didn't happen, but it's something he feels like that's the way it's going to go. And I'm still over here going, they traded for Amari Cooper, and I still think a case can be made for a receiver. How about you?
I agree with that. I mean, I also agree with Sal in that's probably the most likely, if we're looking at betting odds, that the Bills do go defense. But I think a pretty strong case can be made, because here's why. The Bills have a strong track record on day 2 and day 3 of the draft. A lot of the players that they extended this offseason, and even James Cook, if that ultimately happens, were day 2 and day 3 picks. And in a span of 100 selections, or fewer than 100 selections, from 109 to 206, the Bills have 7 picks. So for as much as I don't want to say that Brandon Beane and the analytics staff are going in thinking, we're not really good at first-round selections, but they would have to feel strongly about their ability to find those gems in round 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So just because, again, you don't have to just address your biggest needs in round 1 and then your second biggest need in round 2, third biggest in round 3, if someone that they absolutely love, whether it's one of the speedy receivers that they brought in for a visit, or it's a Jack Bash, or Luther Burden has this precipitous fall and we're all shocked that he's still there, because he is directly helping Josh Allen, prolonging his prime, his MVP prime, that it would make a lot of sense to go, look, we're going to just pick this player because, again, he's the best player on the board, has a direct line to impacting our quarterback, and then we still have 7 more picks to still even double dip at the corner spot, or add a defensive tackle and then an edge rusher and then go all defense on day 2 and day 3. So I wouldn't be telling anyone that it's crazy or that there's no case for this Bills team just because the offense was so good last year that they shouldn't just keep those bullets in the chamber at the wide receiver spot.
Love it. I don't think Burden is better than 50-50 to be picked before the Bills. Do you? I think it's likelier than not that he's available at 30.
Oh, yeah. No, I would be kind of surprised if he's picked, honestly.
Okay.
Because so yes, I would say 50-50 at worst for him to not be there.
Yep, agree. Just real quick, we've talked about a couple of defensive tackles and cornerbacks a lot. Where are you at the latest here, a week away in a day, in terms of their chances of being available? Grant, Nolan, Amos, Hairston.
I don't think the D tackles are going to be there. I don't, and that's from talking to a few people, but more of just a gut feeling in that Derek Harmon is kind of a unique guy in that he's tall and has 4 years of production, really took off last season at Oregon, big-time pass rusher. And what I've said on a few other radio spots and other podcasts that I've been on is, yeah, it's a really deep defensive tackle class. There's good players, but to get a high-caliber pass rusher at the defensive tackle spot, you usually have to get that guy in round 1. So I would be surprised if he's there. And the uniqueness of Kenneth Grant, that he's 330-plus, 21 years old, has upside galore, I would be surprised if 29 teams pass on him before the Bills. I do think Trey Amos could be available, and because of maybe something off the field with Maxwell Hairston, he could also be there. So for as much as I think D tackle, maybe not the biggest need on paper, but I think would help the team the most in round 1, I don't know if all of these names that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks and months at D tackle will actually be there when the Bills go on the clock.
2 other corners real quick I want to ask you about as far as first-round possibility. Ravel from East Carolina, and there's a Notre Dame guy that's coming off an injury. Morrison, I think, is the last name. Are those guys reaches at 30 because of the injuries or not?
Well, I first was saying no, but then you said because of the injuries, and that could maybe kind of like muddy the waters a little, where I don't know how much, not even that, how healthy are they, but like, do teams, have the doctors told them like, hey, this is a 22-year-old coming off an ACL, he'll be completely fine, you won't even realize that he tore his ACL by October. Or with Benjamin Morrison, who had a hip injury in high school, then injured it again at Notre Dame, are they saying his explosiveness is just not going to be there? He'll be 75% as dynamic of an athlete. I would say just watching their film, though, they are 2 first-round caliber corners. Like in my scouting grade book, not that it's perfect, and I certainly get guys wrong, but in my, like all the categories that I grade corners, they are as good, I don't want to say as Travis Hunter, but as good as almost every other first-round corner that I've had graded the last 4 or 5 years in terms of ball skills, mirroring abilities to plant and drive in zone, also just follow in man. So I think they would give the Bills legitimate versatility and 2 big-time athletes, which is something that I've really been banging the table for that I think the Bills need in this secondary.
Chris, thanks a lot.
All right, guys, thanks.
Chris Trapasso each week during the pre-draft season here from CBS Sports. He'll join us again